Ayo ke modal 3 juta mengamankan. Color coding system. Very impressive. Look to the board. I can see that. Okay. I can put some of it. Oh, you're 80 billion.
Kalau kamu mau ada misalnya tinggal sekolah aja berapa hari
Kemarin udah les udah banding sama tes karena nama harus tes
kalau itu tesnya tes yang prediksi beneran.
Lihat memang harus tes. Please, of course. Yes, yes. Tell me how to spell your name. What have you worked in? Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Konteks kuping juga pada akhirnya.
Kalau ngecas di mana Pak ya? Oh, ada. Oke, aku makasih Pak.
That is the correct response. Yes. Yeah. Right. I mean, I'm sure you know this, but it's some.
Oh, kamu nggak ada kenalan di
Nggak minjem tuh kan. Kalau lu bilang saya mau melihat kayak dekat.
Jenderal. We are about to begin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues and friends. Welcome to the book discussion Laboratorium Palestina Bisnis Senjata Israel yang melanggengkan neokolonialisme di seluruh dunia. My name is Hayati Nufus and I will be the host for today. Our discussion today is hosted by the Research Center for Politics-BRIN. Therefore, I would like to greet and express my gratitude to Dr. Atika Nur Alami, the head of the Research Center for Politics. And the book that we will discuss for today is written by Antony Loewenstein. Welcome to our center, sir. And the Indonesian edition of this book that has just been translated by one of our colleagues, Dr. Haripin, Muhammad Haripin. I would also like to greet our speaker, Dr. Bapak Nostalgiawan Wahyudhi from the Research Center for Politics, and our lovely moderator, Ibu Perdana Roswaldy. We are pleased to hold this event in a hybrid format, which is live from BRIN Gatot Subroto here in Jakarta, and also stream on the YouTube channel of the Research Center for Politics. A warm welcome as well to our audience joining us online today. And to begin our event, I kindly invite everyone to stand for the singing of the Indonesian National Anthem, Indonesia Raya.
Jiwanya bangunlah saja untuk Indonesia Raya.
Thank you, and please be seated. To officially open today's event, I would like to invite the head of the Research Center for Politics, Dr. Atika Nur Alami, to deliver the welcome remarks. Please, Ibu Atika, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ibu. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Distinguished speakers, Mr. Antony Loewenstein, the author of the book Palestine Laboratory, and also Mr. Nostalgiawan Wahyudhi, our researcher at the Research Center for Politics, that will focus on the Middle East and Islamic world, including the Palestine issues. Actually, welcome to our book discussion on the Palestine Laboratory, and welcome to our campus. BRIN campus is one of the several campus of BRIN in Jakarta, and actually it is an honor for us to host this important forum. And this forum actually really relates to our, mandates on how we have to the responsibility to deepen our knowledge and reaching the scholarly perspective on global political dynamics. And I think this Palestine issue should be one of the important issues that we need to keep discussing about that. And today we will discuss a book. I got a book and design of Mr. Antony on a very significant and I think provoking about the Palestine Laboratory. Although the book was released 2 years ago, actually. This person.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The magic button. Hello. Yes, it first came out in May 2023 in English, but this edition is updated and does include after October 7th. Yes.
Although it was released in 2023, I think it's still relevant to understand the current situation in Gaza. And the book really, I just hold the book and actually I will read it. I think the book is very interesting in how to try to open the black box, the black box of Israel's military industrial complex, of course. And we can see how the Palestine has been, the testing ground and goals. And importantly for me, it highlights the intersection of the global security industry, the political economy, and the lived experiences of population under occupation. I think it's really important in that sense. And what we are doing here, actually, we want to contribute to this idea. To developing this issue. Because I think it will not only about, the Palestine issue not only about humanitarian concern, but also how we understand the international political dynamics that has been shaped by various factors, political economy, like I mentioned, power and technology. That's why it will be very interesting in that sense. I think that's all for me. I don't want to take a longer time for you to have the time. And again, thank you so much, Mr. Antony and Mr. Yao, for your time and for sharing your thoughts, your experiences. And thank you also the audience for your coming. And hopefully we will have a fruitful discussion today. I think don't forget to read the book. Yeah. And there will be a discount for today's. Okay. I think that's all. Thank you so much again for your coming, and thank you the organizer, especially the Widya from the head or the coordinator of the research cluster on identity and politics for preparing this group discussion, and also the members of the research cluster. I think that's all for me. Thank you so much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atika, for the insightful opening. And ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, let's move to our main event, the book discussion that will be guided by Ibu Perdana Roswaldy, who is a researcher at the Institute for Advanced Research, Monash University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, Ibu Perdana Roswaldy.
Hi everyone. So before we start the discussions, I want to start with the language policy. So we're mainly going to use English, but if you have questions in Indonesian, I will translate it for Antony and vice versa. If there's something that Dr. Long wants to speak in Indonesian, I will also translate in English to Antony. So to be honest, I don't know how to open the discussion with this book because this is a very heavy book for me personally as well. Also because what has been going on for the last 2 years or more now. But I think this is a very important book to understand the imperialist undertone, or like it's no longer undertone to say, especially after October 7th, the imperialist urge within what happens in genocide in Palestine right now. And I think the Palestine Laboratory, atau di bahasa Indonesia Laboratorium Palestina, but successfully explaining that this is not just like a single case, one rogue state going on in one single state, but that this has been happening throughout the world, the surveillance, the mass surveillance, the technological transfers, the industrial military complex, and how many Western European countries, or even sometimes Global South countries, are complicit in perpetuating the problems and supporting even the imperialist natures of the state called Israel. But also at the same time, the Palestine pieces here is the most important part as well, even though it's not like always been in the chapter, but what happened in Palestine is also because Palestine happens to be the testing ground, using Dr. Atika's words, for this military advancement. So whenever we see any air show, there's this like military showcases, the idea that Palestinian violence does not matter, or if anything, Palestinian violence against Palestinians has become the base for this technological advancements. And it's actually, I think one of the most disturbing part that I read in this book is it becomes a marketing point to sell this military technologies. The fact that like, oh yeah, I tested to a 12-year-old Gazan boy doesn't compute to the buyers. Like, should we really test that to children or anyone, and not just children? Actually, it's just like test this to anyone. But if anything, it becomes like, oh, you test this to a bunch of boys playing soccer in the West Bank, and we're definitely going to buy it because it means like it's testing. It proves to be a really, really good technology because it has hurt, harmed, debilitated large populations of Palestinians, both in West Bank, Gaza, or like anywhere in the world as well, because there's a digital surveillance as well. So we're going to dwell into the details of it and the process of the writing in this book. So Antony, the floor is yours.
Thank you all so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here today to speak to this kind of event. And it's worth saying this before I begin that it is inconceivable that I would do a similar event in my own country. And what I mean by that is that the idea of a government, I don't know if the word institution, think tank, however you want to describe BRIN, they have not invited me to speak in Australia, which does not upset me. It's just more of an observation that there is, shall we say, less appetite for having these conversations at the top level of my government, and I would say many Western governments, and I would argue that's because we being the West, we being Australia, are complicit. Australia has been sending for years F-35 fighter jet parts to Israel, which Israel is using over Gaza every day. So this is both the current Albanese government, the former government. It doesn't really matter in some ways who is in charge of Australia, or for that matter, England or the US. There is continuity in how many Western nations view what is happening in Palestine. So I just wanted to say thank you for having me, because this would not be happening. I'm not being invited to speak in Canberra very much. I'll leave it at that, which is fine, but I'm just observing that. Let me briefly introduce myself just so you know a little bit about who I am. The book does begin with an introduction of myself, and the book is not principally about me, but just wanted to, I think it's important just to explain that. I am Australian, of course. I'm also German. I am Jewish, although I call myself a Jewish atheist, which may be a strange concept here, but I have met a number of people in Indonesia who call themselves Muslim atheists this week, which has been interesting. But what that means for me is that I'm not religious, but I'm culturally Jewish. Now, that doesn't inform everything I do in my life or my work, but in this particular subject, and as a journalist, I've been reporting for over 20 years around the world. A lot of my work has not been about Palestine. It's been, I've spent time in Afghanistan when the US was occupying that country. I've done work around disaster capitalism, people making money from misery. I did a book and a film about that included spending time in Papua New Guinea, looking at the extractive industry, in Haiti at the aid industry, in Australia at the private immigration system. I've done a lot of work on the war on drugs, how the drug war led by the US is causing huge amounts of harm around the world, including here. But when it comes to the issue of Israel-Palestine, I guess to some extent it does feel personal because I am Jewish, although as I said, not religious, and Israel claims to speak in my name. It's a Jewish state, self-described Jewish state, and therefore claims to speak for me. Now, it does not speak for me, but it claims to. So I started reporting on this issue more than 20 years ago on Israel-Palestine. I've been visiting and reporting there for many years in the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and Israel itself between 2016 and 2020. I was living in East Jerusalem when the beginnings of the research for this book started. And I guess I won't give you the long history because it does talk about it in the book, but the short version was that at the time, maybe 2016, 2017, there were stories appearing in international press around Pegasus. Pegasus is the Israeli spyware that is installed on your phone. You don't know that it's there, and it can essentially take control of your device. Everything, text messages, emails, photos, nothing is secure. And there were some stories about how Pegasus was appearing on phones around the world. And although the allegation was always that Pegasus was being used against so-called terrorists and criminals, actually what was happening in country after country after country, as the book shows, is it was being used against dissidents and activists and human rights journalists and the vulnerable, essentially. And what frustrated me about so much of the Western media coverage around that story was that, yes, they were breaking some important stories that were showing that it was appearing on people's phones in country X and country Y, but they were missing what I call the elephant in the room. You know that expression, right? The idea that basically they're missing the bigger picture, the big story, which was and is that tools like Pegasus are essentially an arm of the Israeli state, that they are used by Netanyahu, his government, his officials, as a diplomatic tool to try to make friends, so to speak. So Netanyahu or his officials would go around the world. This has been happening for about 15 or so years. We're talking about so many nations, from India to Rwanda to Hungary to, my understanding, Indonesia, and promoting this idea of saying, we will sell you this unbelievably powerful technology. You can, who knows how they actually promote it privately, but you can basically go after anyone you want, your enemies, your political enemies. And in return, yes, you pay us money, but also we would like another kind of favor. Now, in some countries' cases, such as Mexico, which has become the world's most obsessive and biggest user of Pegasus for a range of reasons, they changed their vote to the United Nations for a number of years. And Israel, obviously, in some forums is very isolated internationally. That's only increased since October 7. And in some ways, I think that started me on this journey to investigate the industry from Israel. Let me give you just some statistics and some details so you know the scale of what we're talking about here. So Israel's obviously a relatively small country. It's a population of about 10 million, 80% Jewish, 20% Arab. If you include the West Bank and Gaza, it's about 15 million, which compared to Indonesia, obviously is very, very small, tiny country, population-wise. And yet it's the 8th biggest arms dealer in the world, which is huge. And they've essentially done that, and the book explains where that begins, from decades ago. This did not start on October 7, didn't start weeks before. It's been going on for decades, where Israel has used the occupied Palestinian territories, mainly Gaza and the West Bank, as a testing ground to manage and control what they view, the Israelis, as an unwanted population, the Palestinians. And this started, I argue, really even before 1948, when Israel was founded. It certainly continued after Israel's birth in 1948, and it deepened up to 1967, when Israel obviously took control of Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. And they had all these Palestinians they basically had to manage or control, so to speak. And they designed all these ways to do so, technologies and tactics. And ultimately, in the modern era, let me give you a sense of what that means. So that means in the 21st century spyware and killer drones and artificial intelligence warfare, much of which has been used in Gaza since October 7. I'll come to that after October 7 a bit later. And after 9/11, which obviously was not an attack on Israel, it was an attack on the US, but Israel saw the opportunity very quickly to sell themselves, and there's a lot in the book about this, to sell themselves as the so-called solution to the global fears around terrorism. So they would go to the US, to Australia, to many other nations, including in the global south, and they would say, we've been fighting a war on terror for decades against Palestinians. Let us help you. Let us show you how to do it. And that led to a huge explosion in the Israeli arms industry, surveillance industry, technology industry. So this involved often, I would argue, racist techniques. So country after country after country was looking to deal with what they viewed as their problems with terrorism. Obviously, this involves some countries more than others. And Israel was open to both selling the technology or the weapons to do so, but also the tactics, the training. And personally speaking, and the book I think shows this, I don't think it's led to a reduction in terrorism. I think actually it's exacerbated the problems that have existed. It's the illusion of so-called progress on this issue of terrorism, which ignores, again, the elephant in the room, that the vast, vast majority of terrorism is not happening because somebody wakes up one morning and hates Israelis or hates Americans or hates Indonesians for political reasons. I'm not justifying the action. I'm saying it comes for a political reason. The war in Afghanistan, the war in Gaza, an occupation of whatever it may be. I'm not justifying the terrorism. I'm saying that it comes from a particular place. And that's the case for decades. This is established fact around the study of terrorism. And in some ways, what I talk about in the book is Israel's not just selling weapons and surveillance. That's obviously part of it. They make a lot of money in 2024, the last year that we have reliable figures. Israel had made just under 15 billion US dollars. It's a huge amount of money. Its biggest purchaser was Europe. European nations, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, were all going to Israel almost begging to sell certain technology, missile defense shields, etc. Many Arab states, who at least should be, maybe, possibly, in solidarity with Palestinians, certainly, in my view, are not, and are buying this surveillance technology because they fear their own people. Many, many Arab states are scared of their own people. They're dictatorships, they're autocracies, they're not democracies, of course. And I would argue, I show this in the book, that after the Arab Spring in 2011 or so, which sadly has ended in mostly a reversal of any gains that existed, many Arab dictatorships were petrified that that would happen to them, to their own nation. And the country that they often went to for advice to manage that was Israel. So to get surveillance technology, which had been tested first on Palestinians, was then deployed against people in various countries in the Arab Muslim world. The Palestinians were yet again seen as expendable or irrelevant. Let me fast forward to October 7 and what's happened since, and then maybe we can have questions, or maybe want to say something as well. Is that when October 7 happened, a few years ago now, on the one hand, it was an audacious, shocking attack. It obviously killed huge amounts of people, but on the other hand, it was not hugely surprising to me. And let me explain what I mean by that briefly. On the one hand, what it showed was that all the technology and tools and weapons that Israel had deployed around Gaza, much of which I had seen. I've been to Gaza many times, not since October 7. Most people here will know that Israel has not allowed any foreign journalists to enter Gaza in the last 2 years, and who knows if and when that's going to change. But there's, they'd spent billions and billions of US dollars to build all this, what they thought, so what they told themselves was a secure border with Gaza. And within a matter of minutes, it all disappeared. Hamas breached it through drones, through attacks, through paragliders. On the one hand, not hugely sophisticated, but on the other hand, shows that the Israeli defences were a house of cards, meaning that they were pretty terrible. And what's become very clear since to me is that, having done research on this, I went to Israel and Palestine last year. There's a film version of my book, which you can see on Al Jazeera, which came out earlier this year, which kind of deepens and shows the arguments of the message of the book, is that Israel overly relied on technology in the deluded belief that that somehow would keep them safe, A, and B, thought somehow, to me, in an incredibly ignorant, dehumanizing way, that Palestinians will be content to be occupied forever. This doesn't justify to me what Hamas did. I think they committed many, many grievous war crimes on October 7th. But we can't be overly shocked that if you essentially imprison 2.3 million people in an open-air prison for nearly 20 years, they're going to revolt. It's just, this happens in country after country after country. So you think, based on the fact that the Israeli weapons and surveillance failed miserably on October 7, the countries would not be coming to them for advice for how to fight their wars. And yet, Israel inevitably unleashed hell on Gaza. It was very clear to me. I thought this on October 7 itself when I saw what was happening, that, of course, I could never exactly imagine the Israeli response, but it was pretty clear it was going to be utterly devastating, as it was very clear after 9/11 that America was going to unleash hell somewhere. Certainly Afghanistan, as it turned out, Iraq, and many other places, disastrously and criminally. So what Israel essentially did in Gaza was the aim was mass destruction. The aim was not to go after so-called terrorists. The aim was to level Gaza. And that's exactly what has happened. Gaza does not exist anymore. There are people in Gaza. We don't even know the exact number of people who have died. We don't even know the number of people who have left. But Gaza no longer exists as a viable territory. It may be rebuilt, might not. We don't know, really, tragically and outrageously. But in the last 2 years, Israel has used a whole range of technologies and tools that they are actively and daily testing on Palestinians. So killer drones, artificial intelligence warfare, so the mass use of data stored in cloud services provided by Amazon and Google and Palantir and Microsoft. So Western American big tech companies actively involved in assisting Israel's genocide. And what I think Israel has shown, even though I would argue on the one hand, Israel's actions have not particularly succeeded by their own judgment. Hamas still exists. Hamas is still controlling vast parts of Gaza. Gaza does not exist anymore, but Hamas certainly still does. That they've shown much of the world how you can essentially destroy an entire territory, and I would argue get away with it. And this is another theme I talk about in the book, that Israel is often selling this idea of getting away with it. Many nations go to Israel, this is obviously normally done privately, not publicly, and say, how do you do this? How do you occupy another country, Palestine, a territory, for over half a century? It's the longest occupation in modern times, without sanctions, really, without boycotts, without international pressure. Now, there are actors in the world who are against what's going on, to be sure, but when it comes down to it, the entire West, Western elites at least, much of the Western press, not so much people in the West. Many of you will have seen huge protests around the world, and there's been a real shift in how I think many people in the West now view what is happening in Palestine, and therefore how they view Israel. I just want to finish on one point, which we can talk about more. One of the concerns I have around the laboratory, in a way, is not even particularly about weapons or surveillance. It is the fact that increasingly Israel is viewed as a model for the global far right. So far right movements in England, the US, Europe, India, some of them are in government, like Modi, I would argue. Prime Minister Modi in India, in my view, is a Hindu fundamentalist and wants to create a Hindu nationalist, or is creating a Hindu nationalist country, wants to exclude the 200 million Muslims. In much of the far right in the US, in Europe, some in government, some not, look to Israel as a model. What does that mean? They look to Israel as a model because for them, an ethno-nationalist state is an ideal way to order society. So they're not looking to recreate a Jewish state in, say, Sweden or France or Germany, but they want to create a Christian ethno-state. And they admire Israel for a few reasons. It's anti-Islam, anti-immigration, anti-migration, anti-diversity, anti-multiculturalism, proudly chauvinist, proudly racist. Now, in Israel's case, that's directed at Arabs and Muslims principally, and often in, say, Sweden or Germany or France, the far right has similar hatreds: Islam, Muslims, immigration, multiculturalism, etc. So you have all these far right groups expressing these views and showing it, but worse, you have the Israeli government welcoming it. You have a self-described Jewish state openly partnering ideologically and practically with far-right actors who traditionally have hated Jews. The far-right does not like Jewish people in general, and yet Israel, as a self-described Jewish state, warmly embraces the far-right, which says to me all you need to know about the direction that Israel is going in, and I fear much of the West. I don't think the far-right is guaranteed to take control of the world. I'm not saying that's the case, but it certainly is moving in a certain direction in much of the West, where far-right actors are gaining huge influence. And that does mean a deeply felt feeling against immigration and Muslims and Islam. Anyone in this room will have seen that rhetoric and those policies for years. So I write this book as a warning. That's how I see the book. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Just to summarize, I'm going to summarize, but I think going to be 3 important points in it. Jadi yang pertama, penjualan teknologi militer, baik di surveillance digital ataupun seperti tank, senjata, itu sebenarnya juga bukan cuma masalah ekonomi. Kadang-kadang kan di bukunya Antony ini dijelaskan, mereka menjual, oh ini kan ekonomi kita, karena hampir sebagian besar APBN Israel itu ditopang dari ekonomi militer yang berani, tapi di saat yang sama ini juga untuk mengubah relasi geopolitik. Jadi untuk mengubah perilaku orang-orang yang dulu mungkin kalau kita lihat di Indonesia kan ada KAA ya, bahwa kan kalau salah satu butir KAA itu tidak mendukung Israel, tidak mendukung pendidikan di atas dunia dimanapun, tapi dengan ekonomi militer seperti ini, sikap anti kolonial itu mulai berubah gitu sepanjang sejarah. Jadi misalnya tadi Antony mencontohkan, oh Meksiko jadinya membela Israel, ternyata tidak, oh kita nggak mau voting deh kalau untuk apa namanya kemerdekaan Palestina. Yang kedua, bahwa ada konstruksi rasis soal terorisme di sini, bahwa mereka tidak pernah melihat masyarakat Palestina itu sebagai orang, bahkan gitu. Kalau ini kan trop rasis imperial dulu ya, dari zaman dulu, bahkan di zaman Belanda ya. Kalau melihat anak kecil orang Indonesia, mereka nggak akan bilang itu anak kecil, tapi ini orang dewasa yang bisa jadi teroris gitu. Jadi the idea of being terrorist itu sangat dikonfine dengan identitas orang Palestinanya sendiri. Jadi mereka merasa Israel itu menjustifikasikan, oh kita kan sudah melawan teroris ini, kita ini ada di lorong sama teroris, jadi tolong dong kasih uang kalian buat bikin startup nation, kalau yang dipakai istilah di buku ini soal Israel, untuk menggambarkan Israel, uang ini dipakai untuk terus technological advancement, untuk kemajuan teknologi militernya itu tadi. Dan tentu saja dengan delusi bahwa semua orang akan mendukung dia, karena kan ada juga imaji Zionis yang kayak kami adalah bangsa yang kalah, kami perpetual victim gitu, jadi terus merasa menjadi korban, padahal mereka berdiri di atas ratusan miliar dolar industri militer industrial kompleks. Nah, dan itu menjadi juga justifikasi dari technological prowess-nya orang Israel ini, negara Israelnya juga. Dan yang paling penting, yang poin terakhir yang Antony bilang adalah bagaimana lebih lanjutnya lagi, atau mungkin lebih serius, bahwa melihat Israel itu sebagai model pemerintahan ideal bagi banyak negara yang mungkin mengalami krisis, karena kita tahu, karena kan semuanya riset politik ya, bahwa banyak kan negara tuh geser ke right wing governance itu ketika ada banyak titik-titik krisis gitu di negaranya, dan mulai berpikir, oh mungkin cara kita menjalankan negara ya dengan ethno-nasionalisme gitu, dan ini dianggap sebagai cara yang ideal untuk mengembalikan dan memulihkan diri dan mengembalikan lagi martabat bangsa dengan konsep ethno-nasionalisme ini. Karena kan juga banyak sekali orang-orang di Kongres, orang pemerintah di Israel, di Knesset namanya kalau DPR-nya gitu, menganggap bahwa etnonasionalisme itu semacam law of nature gitu, bahwa yang memimpin negara itu ya harusnya yang dari spesifik ras tertentu, agama tertentu, dan itu dinormalisasi dan menormalkan industri militer Israel ini. Berarti kita juga menormalkan etnonasionalisme sebagai bentuk pemerintahan yang ideal. We're gonna move on to Dr. Wawan for a response. Dr. Wawan.
Thank you very much to Pepe and also Antony for this beautiful book. And first, I'd like to thanks to the director of Center for International Studies and also the translator of this book, Dr. Muhammad Haribin, for organizing this beautiful event. And also, I would like to thanks to Martin Kiri Publishers, who published this book in the Indonesian language, and also facilitate this event. And also, I would like to thanks to our campus, Pusat Riset Politik-BRIN, Politics, Dr. Atikah Nur Alami, yang telah memberikan ruang yang cukup bagus bagi kita untuk berdiskusi pada siang hari ini. And also it is a pleasure for me to be here to discuss about the book in front of the writers, Antony Loewenstein, about Laboratorium Palestina. And thanks to Antony come to our institutions and in Jakarta, and also for writing this beautiful piece of work that offer a very distinctive perspective on Palestine. I heard this book was awarded as the best book in 2023 in Australia, as highest journalist honor. And before I heard this book, actually, even this book is published first, and what is that? The documentary was published later with Al Jazeera. But the first touch in this issue on Palestinian laboratory, I saw in YouTube 2 episodes, right, on Palestinian laboratory, on that published by Al Jazeera. And actually, if you see the documentary in Al Jazeera, will give you the guideline of the the point of ideas that want to explain by Antony, and you will see in the first stage the definition of what is Palestinian it is and how it works, and also in the second part you will go to how this armament productions by Israel, also military technology on Israel, will give some impact to other countries in the world. But in details, actually, you can get in this book. And for the next explanation, when I highlight this book is very distinctive, actually, because this book provides another perspective for Middle Eastern scholar in Indonesia that often too much rely on the foreign policy perspective and also international law and also humanitarian issues. We have read journals about these explanations, but when we hold this book on the issue of Palestinian laboratory, this gives some widen our view that there is thing happen outside of our analysis on foreign policy. This book is on the side in front of my eyes, and it also examines the negative impact of Israeli occupations and also apartheid policies in Palestine from a military business perspective. Antony, in my set, had a privilege actually, especially his role as journalist, that he was able to observe and also report on ground directly in Israel and also Palestine. And in the middle of ongoing conflict there. And this privilege provide a book with excellent details and also rich data. You will see any detailed fact and also certain happenings in Israel and Palestine that maybe you can get it out in formal media. And we as researchers maybe do not have this kind of opportunities that Antony has, because we have when we conducting some research, we often face it with kind of limitations, procedures, and form in terms of permit, security issues or reasons, ethical clearance, and informed consent that to ensure that our research will not harm anybody. So, based on this journalism perspective, this book will give you the fact that the title of this book, like we read in some newspaper, will attracting us, and our director of Center for Political Studies said this is quite provocative. When you write the biggest title, Palestinian Laboratory, this is quite encouraging us to explore actually what Antony mean by the Palestinian Laboratory, how did it exist, and what for reasons. And the title of this book actually, this is the conclusion of his investigation in Palestine and also Israel, which views Palestinian-Israeli war in occupied West Bank and Gaza, if we want to expand it into, in my opinion, into three analysis, three explanation. First, this is experimental laboratory for testing weapon and military technology produced by Israel with specific need and goals. We should underline the differences between armed productions in Israel and other countries, that based on this experience, Israel produced weapon that gives some specific use to like for city war, and that is maybe you will not find in other countries when they make mass production of weapon. And Israel doing make some advancement disarmament production. Sometimes they will use real communities, real human beings to test this as a test subject, target, and also experiment. This is very sad when we see the fight in the field that in this modern world, this kind of inhuman activism is still happening. And the second, the Palestinian land is also placed for a proven marketing for this for any weapons produced by Israel companies. And Israel does not hesitate to feature the killing of civilians in Palestine as advertisement for this product, and to illustrate that the effectiveness and accuracy of this weapon technology without respect for human rights violations. And for the third one, this book claimed that Israel's views of occupations, colonialisms, ethnic cleansing, and also apartheid politics is not as national or internal problem of that state, or threaten the country's capacity or economy. And for this kind of war or conflict that happened in Israel, the Israel itself has turned the war in Palestine as a huge capital potential. They shift the problem into something that can benefit for the country, which is not only finance the apartheid politics, colonialisms, or war in Palestine, and that carry out already more than 70 years. but also become a source of economic and political benefits. This is we must underline this. Israel transfer the problem, their spending of money and economy to become a source, capital source to the benefit for not only economic but also their political positions. As we know that war always has two sides of coin, has a negative impact on humanity and harming countless victims among civilians, particularly whom that is very vulnerable, like women and children. But the other side, it also provide economic legitimacy for Israel war in Israel for violation humanitarian law. We also provide a ground for war-proven weapon. So the Palestinian laboratory will give every arm manufacturers in Israel get some legitimation for their weapon and military productions. And war is often used as the most effective marketing tools for the companies. Israel has been doing this for many years up to current days, and the occupation in Palestine are used by Israel as the most important asset for their military business. And the side for from the side of study of international relations, from this book we will see first, this book believes in the theory of elites and place rational actors largely determine the direction of Israeli politics. The influence of inner circle within the Prime Minister office, including the rise of right-wing politics in Israel and the awakening of left-wing or liberal parties, has created a fertile ground for harsh apartheid and extreme ethnic cleansing in Israel. From the second side, Israel is very effective in using bargaining power, in establishing international relations with other countries and making a partner countries as political slaves in these regions. And as explained by Antony, some countries like Mexico, Uganda, or other countries in Middle East, Morocco, including Saudi Arabia, will get give some negotiation with Israel toward these positions. And Israel also, based on this book, sell more than 80% of weapons produced by military companies in the countries, and make Israel as a tiny country that is leading in weapon production and sales. Israel also take advantage actually from this strategic opportunity to arms themselves as diplomatic tools to change the foreign policy direction of a consumer or partner countries in international stage. And Israel also need to gain the support on its increasingly position isolated from international communities that has been done in many countries. And an example, okay, for the next reasons, it is very clear that since before the Gaza war, October 7, 2023, Israel actually actively campaigning the policy for normalizations within the Arab countries, and this is a part of the country's ambitions to realize the new guideline for Middle East, or as Netanyahu in the United Nations said about the new Middle East without Palestine in the map. And for the next explanation, this book also benefited from the growing and gaining ground of worldwide democratic backsliding. So what happened in the Palestine over a decade is in line with the growth of some democratic backsliding happening around the world, not only in the Southeast Asia, for example. It is also in the United States. And based on our work on integrated democratic tolerance and also beyond radicalism, that in line with the work of Hagel and Kaufman, we found that democratic backsliding in contemporary days is featured by authoritarianism that grows within democratically elected government. So it happened in many countries, including Turkey. There is elected government, but the countries turned into authoritarianism. Also Indonesia, and we also see this happening with the U.S. under Trump presidency, with claim as the most democratic countries in the world, but actually his policy on Palestine or inside of internal policy in country turned into democratic backsliding. Democratic backsliding in the world actually featured by some issues like the collapse of separation of power, and also suppressing political rights and civil liberties, and also manipulating electoral process by harassing the opponents and intervening or dominating the electoral agency. We will see in the last 2024 election in the United States how IPAC funded many PACs to make a black campaign and also use black money to attack the candidate who are not support on Israel, and also not support to make America as the world's important countries. 3 minutes. Okay. Okay. This kind of government on Israel, this kind of government is on highly needed for military technology, and also the country involved in democratic backsliding, they need to this kind of weapon or military technology produced by Israel and especially in the Palestinian, because the government is actually want to dominate and control the society on daily basis. So the technology like facial recognition systems, surveillance, artificial intelligence warfare, drones, body control, all of this is very needed to warn the domination in the societies. Then all of these are perfectly developed and produced in Israel. The fourth session for international issues is, in fact, Israel foreign policy is heavily dependent on major powers. In this case, we can see United States, UK, and Germany for military support and also political influence and dominating particularly of international institutions like the UN. Israel is on highly needed for the presence of this superpower, actually. And this is necessary for Israel to justify and also provide a justification for its activities that violate human rights and international law, and making the countries immune at the United Nations. Israel positions as a national state based on ethnic superiority, which is generally uncommon actually in the other countries' international states. This point highlights the need for this book. Also, add maybe some chapter on IPAC for specific, because how Israel is heavily dependent on this superpower like America, and also depend on the effectiveness of the work of AIPAC in American politics. How AIPAC designed important work that set political norm to include Israel as important part of U.S. interest and also foreign policy. This is maybe this is some ideas for me that maybe Antony can input this factor, because without America, the Israeli politics also the kind of activities in Palestine that make the land to become a laboratory for this armed productions will be highly depend on the lobby or also the political line of America. This is my opinion. Maybe I will give the next session to moderators.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wawan. I think, sorry, bahasa Indonesia. Dr. Wawan membawa poin penting soal ekonomi militer yang bukan cuma untuk mengisi pundi-pundi APBN-nya Israel, tapi bagaimana ekonomi bisnis militer ini juga ada konstitutif, maksudnya membangun okupasi, memperpanjang nafas okupasi dan neokolonialisme dan imperialisme di Palestina itu sendiri. Dan yang lebih pentingnya lagi bahwa penjualan ini bukan cuma oke, ini ada barang kita jual, ini bukan perdagangan biasa. This is their foreign policy. Ini adalah yang membangun ini adalah kebijakan luar negeri Israel penjual teknologi militer tersebut untuk melakukan normalisasi terhadap negaranya tadi. Dan kan sudah dibahas sedikit, tapi ini juga permasalahannya karena ini banyak ya negara yang memakai teknologinya Israel. Ini di bukunya Antony sendiri dia nulisnya persisnya seperti ini. Lebih gampang nyari negara yang nggak pakai Pegasus daripada negara yang pakai Pegasus gitu. Ini adalah bentuk dari normalisasi, dan ini makanya ada gerakan boycott, divestment, and sanction, karena apapun yang kita beli melalui perpanjangan tangan Israel itu secara langsung berkontribusi terhadap okupasi di Palestina. Oke. Kita punya waktu tanya jawab sekitar 20 menit. Kalau ada yang nanya, ada bonus buku, information? Ada bonus buku nggak kalau buat yang nanya? Oh, nggak ada. Oke. Masnya banyak dulu. Oke. Boleh pakai bahasa Indonesia atau bahasa Inggris? It's okay. I will just translate either way.
Well, my regards, Antony. There are two questions from me. My name is Jenderal. I just want to ask you a question. Since you are active in indigenous Australian activism, I know that's your background. I saw it quite a lot. What are the similarities between the oppression faced by the Palestinians and the indigenous Australian population? And then the second one is it possible that for the future of warfare, this is from my summary of the book, that weapons testing becoming much more common, on which we as ordinary human beings could become random guinea pigs, experimental guinea pigs that is being subjected for weapons test. It can happen anywhere. So, is it going to be more common, this weapons test? Thank you.
Untuk efisiensi waktu kita kumpulin pertanyaan ini dulu ya. Okay. Thank you, Antony. My name is Dina Sabrina. I'm a human rights lawyer and also researcher. I have a question. The first one is, based on your experience, how do we track the procurement of the use of the spyware, such as NSO Group? Because on our experience, especially for CSO Group, they hide it and use it another name in the country budget plan to procurement and maintenance this technology. And the second one, how do we hold the military tech company for the accountable for the violation of the human rights? Because like in Indonesia, the practice is this the vendor of the spyware technology and military technology is also trading the outside of the legal framework. I mean, like the businessmen who want to use this spyware for the battle between the businessman, oligarch, repression activists, they use it.
also. So how to, the accountability and as the responsibility of this military activity group. Thank you. This was
Yes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Saya mungkin menggunakan bahasa tanah air sebagai bahasa dewasa kita. Pertanyaan saya berkaitan dengan tema diskusi yang di acara tadi berkaitan dengan Laboratorium Palestina. Jadi isu yang diangkat itu adalah soal kolonialisme yang terjadi di Palestina. Jadi saya mengingat 500 tahun lalu ketika POC masuk ke Nusantara melakukan perdagangan rempah di Nusantara, POC menggunakan perdagangan pala sebagai alat untuk kemudian membantai masyarakat Nusantara. Salah satunya itu di Kepulauan Banda, sekitar 14.000 manusia begadang habis oleh sebagian begadang habis oleh POC itu menggunakan hasil daripada perdagangan rempah-rempah itu sendiri. Begitupun juga dengan Palestina hari ini. Bagaimana ketika Israel menggunakan bisnis Widya untuk kemudian digunakan untuk membantai rakyat Palestina, ini saya melihat ini dua hal yang berbeda kejadiannya. Nah, jadi pertanyaan saya, posisi Indonesia itu di posisi bagaimana? Apakah Indonesia juga terlibat dalam bisnis nuklir ini, ataukah Indonesia mengambil posisi yang beda? Karena ketika Indonesia juga masuk dalam bisnis nuklir dalam saya pikir mungkin dari tanggapan narasumber sebagai penulis buku tersebut terhadap apa yang saya ilustrasikan tadi, kira-kira pandangan penulis seperti. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
The four questions. But the last one is about it reminds him of a colonial playbook that also happened like 100 years ago. That yes, it seems it's just like an ordinary trade, but it's not. And the fact that this trade money will return to the indigenous people, the colonized people, in the form of weapons that kill them. So in that way, you would like to know the qualification that I think is also something to look at when it goes on in the Indonesian foreign policy, considering Indonesia's relation with Israel.
I do remember most of those questions. If I forget, please remind me. So the first one was in relation, what are the comparisons, if any, between Israel's occupation of Palestine and Australia's treatment of our indigenous population? There are similarities and differences. Briefly, there's obviously lots to be said about this question. As an Australian, I am profoundly, deeply, regularly ashamed of how we as Australians, not me personally, but my government authorities, treat our indigenous populations. I presume people have a bit of a sense of the history. I'm not going to go into it, except that there was an attempt at genocide against indigenous populations in Australia by the British. It was largely successful. Obviously, there are indigenous Australians who still are alive today. In general, their life expectancy is much less than the rest of people. The rate of incarceration is way higher. In certain states of Australia, particularly in the Northern Territory and Queensland, there is a growing attempt by Australian authorities in various states and the federal government to either not do much about this or to see a solution as much more law and order. Australia is a settler colonial country, as is Israel. Now, there are differences, of course. On the so-called plus side, Australia has, to a small extent, had begun a discussion about acknowledging the history. Israel has not even started that conversation. This is not to defend Australia from our current behaviour, but there is roughly 20 years ago, our then Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, made a formal apology to Indigenous populations for the fact that huge numbers of them have been literally stolen from their mothers and fathers and put into other homes. So it's exactly the stolen generation. Now, there was no compensation along with that, which I thought was a mistake. And there are huge problems that still exist, but in Israel itself, there is, and Israel, of course, is a newer country. Australia's been around for 240 years, but Israel is less than 80. Israel is like, it's not a question Israel hasn't even begun the conversation. They are in profound denial about what they're doing. I mean, obviously they know what they're doing. I mean, denial that it's wrong, denial that it shouldn't happen. The second question, there's obviously a lot more to say about that, but that's so yes, there are definite similarities. And I think a lot of it is to do with the profound contempt that many in the Israeli population and elites and Australian populations have with brown and black bodies. I mean, racism clearly is a major factor in a lot of settler colonial countries, including Canada, New Zealand, America. In terms of the risk that we're all guinea pigs, that is definitely a risk. And I think one of the concerns that I have, and it's talked about in the book, but also in the Al Jazeera film, is that, for example, is increasingly artificial intelligence is going to be used in warfare by the US, by other states. Israel has been using it extensively in Gaza in the last 2 years. As I said before, assisted by American big tech companies providing cloud services, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Palantir, with the explicit idea of using massive amounts of data gathered through years of surveillance to spit out so-called targets, which are given maybe 10 or 20-second human oversight. So all this information is put into a machine, a computer. It spits out a certain target here, there. The fact that a human might look at that for 10 or 20 seconds, a person cannot adequately assess that. They can't, because it's just impossible. A human brain can't do that. So the impact basically is that, as I said, that the aim in Gaza was not pinpoint targeting. The aim was mass destruction. So the so-called justification that was used by Israel and its lawyers was that if we want to go after a certain Hamas member, even if they were incredibly low level, and it was even questionable whether they were Hamas, because many Hamas were not militant. Hamas was the government of Gaza, so they might be an official in a department. You can justify, in inverted commas, hundreds of civilians being killed. This was the I think it's nonsense, but that was the so-called justification that Israel gave. And I guarantee you, you will see that technology used in other conflicts. I don't know where, I don't know when, but it will happen. So I think one of the things that big tech companies were doing, that Google's and Microsoft and others, they were also using Palestinians as a laboratory to see how effective it could be in storing massive amounts of data. And I know that those companies are going around the world offering those services to other nations, either for domestic purposes, civilian purposes, or military purposes. Again, the laboratory was Palestine. Now, I'm obviously not saying in the book or my work that there aren't other conflicts in the world that are testing grounds. Ukraine, for example, has been a huge testing ground for both Russia and Ukraine in the West for weapons and drones, etc. So it's not just Gaza, of course, but what you do find, I think, increasingly, as I say in the book regularly, what happens in Palestine does not stay there, and it's being exported to the world. Your question. The first one, I think, was about the increase or the amazing secrecy around Pegasus and NSO Group, the Israeli company. And one of the way that most of us know which countries have used Pegasus, Hungary to Italy to Rwanda to India, the list goes on and on, was not because the governments of the day admitted it, because they usually don't. It's because certain activists' phones are checked and tested, or journalists are tested by, there's groups like the Citizen Lab, which is a digital rights group in Canada. They do this work, often looking at phones to assess whether they've been targeted by spyware. Then they release information to say, are you aware country X, India, Hungary. I mean, a government will know, but individuals will not necessarily, that your phones are being targeted by Israel. And I show in the book, in country after country after country, when Netanyahu or senior officials from the Israeli government would go to these countries, Hungary, India, Rwanda, etc., within 6 or 12 months, Pegasus or other spyware was being deployed on activists in that country. Now, I'm aware over the years there's been suggestions that Pegasus or other Israeli spyware tools have been used here. I have in the book, which was not my own reporting, it was other people's reporting that I thought was credible that I shared, that Israeli spyware had been used against members of the LGBT community here in Indonesia about 6 or 7 years ago. And if Indonesia and the president chooses to normalize relations with Israel, which apparently the president is flirting with, more than flirting with, it almost seems guaranteed that Indonesia will face far more exposure to Israeli weapons and spyware directed inevitably at his perceived enemies, journalists, dissidents, writers, West Papua activists, the list goes on. I mean, you see this in country after country after country. Indonesia will not be immune to that. And the secrecy is a problem. But there's no simple answer to how to get around that beyond, as people have been asking me during this week, I've been traveling around the country, how do we know what's happening here? As I say to people, make sure that your phones, if you think you're vulnerable, make sure your phone is checked. Now, you can't do that yourself, but there are organizations and NGOs that will do that. Normally, I don't know about within Indonesia, but certainly around the world they do, to check whether your phone has been violated, essentially. There's no way you can really tell by your phone. You can't sort of, check. There's ways, but it requires a lot of technical knowledge. So there's no way to really know that. I would say also that people here and elsewhere be aware that encrypted apps are not entirely secure, whether you use Signal or WhatsApp or whatever, they are encrypted. But if your phone is compromised by an intelligence service, a police force, whatever, it's useless because they can control and see everything on your phone. Remind me the second part of the question was?
It's about military accountability.
Yeah, well, military accountability is almost a contradiction in terms, isn't it? I mean, in many, many countries, and certainly within Indonesia, I'm aware it has been historically too for decades. Again, in many, many countries that I've looked at this question around, it's not just spyware, but Israeli technology or surveillance, that accountability is generally not coming from the military itself. It just doesn't. The military is always terrible at investigating itself. We see this in country after country. I'm aware it's very similar here. It's going to come from outside actors. I don't mean from outside the country, I mean from within the country. And to me, the only way that there will be accountability for these crimes is actually these companies being held to account. There needs to be, for example, around spyware, a global regulation. There is no regulation on these weapons. They are weapons. I mean, Pegasus might not kill you like a bullet, but it is a weapon, essentially. It violates your privacy and details. And there is no global regulation. The EU kind of flirted with it a few years ago and it went nowhere. And you see that because virtually every European state is using it, some form of Israeli spyware, right? Still. And this is not particularly whether it's a right-wing government or left. They all use it. The Mexican government 15 years ago was right-wing, fighting an insane drug war. Fast forward to years afterwards, the left-wing governments were using Pegasus as well. So it's left and right, because ultimately governments are addicted to this technology. It's like a drug user in a way. They don't want to give it up because wouldn't it be lovely, so the thinking goes, to hear what my enemies are thinking? Wouldn't it be lovely to hear what my friends are thinking? Wouldn't it be lovely to hear what the journalists are talking about or writing about or saying? And without a global regulation around this, or for that matter, certain states in groupings saying we will not use or deploy spyware, which as far as I'm aware is not being said, certainly in Indonesia or countries in this region, including Australia, doesn't happen. That's a problem. So I would love companies like NSO Group, who, by the way, the founders of Pegasus has just been sold to an American company, no longer Israeli, looking to get more business in the US and elsewhere because the Biden administration sanctioned NSO Group for its human rights abuses. They're trying to get new business, and I fear with the Trump administration they will find a very willing buyer. The colonial, look, I mean, yes, the short answer is absolutely yes. What Israel is doing in Palestine is the ultimate definition of colonialism. It's viewing Palestinians as second-class citizens. It views Palestinians as unequal. It views them as not deserving equal rights. And one of the things I just want to finish on this point, one of the issues that has frustrated me in the last years since October 7 is the Western, and I'm guessing Indonesian, obsession around Netanyahu. Now, he's the Prime Minister of Israel. You can't ignore him. It's an important figure, unfortunately. And I think he should be in The Hague for war crimes. But the issue in Israel is not Netanyahu. The issue is that the vast majority of Israeli Jews, based on public polling, not my opinion, public polling, support what is going on. There were two key polls this year. You can find these online very easily. One of them showed that the majority of Israeli Jews supported starving Palestinians. The majority of Israeli Jews support the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from Palestine. The ultimate goal of Israel, in my view, and it's not a view, it's based on evidence, is Israel does not want Palestinians in Palestine. As few as possible. Gaza, the West Bank, and I would argue Israel itself. And Israel has done this at various points in its history, 1948, 1967, 2023, for different reasons, different times, different situations. But that remains the ultimate goal. So the idea that, in my view, an Indonesian government, the largest Muslim country in the world, wanting to now potentially recognize Israel after what has happened in the last 2 years, let alone the last 80 years. But even putting that aside, for the last 2 years, killing, what, 70, 80, 90, 100,000, principally Muslims. There are some Palestinian Christians, but mostly Muslims, to me is, I don't know, what can I say, beyond morally bankrupt.
Dr. Do you want to chime in for what kind of legal standing that Indonesia officially has towards its own shaky Israeli relationship?
Indonesia sampai saat ini Indonesian standpoint on Palestinians masih sama dengan apa yang dicanangkan oleh PBB tentang two-state solutions, dan memang kita bisa melihat ya perubahan Indonesian foreign policy terjadi sebetulnya pada periode kedua pemerintahan Jokowi, di mana untuk pertama kali setelah pasca reformasi kita mendapati bahwa foreign policy Indonesia sangat terbuka terhadap Timur Tengah dan menggunakan isu-isu Palestina sebagai salah satu yang sebetulnya di internal itu kontradiksi, di mana waktu itu pemerintahan Jokowi dianggap anti-Islam, tetapi justru pada saat itu dia memberikan tekanan yang sangat luar biasa pada Timur Tengah sebagai salah satu penekanan foreign policy. Dan kita melihat tidak hanya foreign policy ya, untuk pertama kalinya huge investment datang dari negara-negara Teluk Timur Tengah untuk ke Indonesia, dan ini bisa dimanfaatkan dari sisi yang lain. Pada pemerintahan yang sekarang sangat berbeda dengan dulu ya. Kita dulu banyak berharap bahwa sebetulnya ada one man show, one girl show gitu. Presidennya sangat pasif di dunia internasional, tapi menteri luar negerinya sangat luar biasa. Tetapi yang sekarang yang ada dibalik. Jadi foreign policy Indonesia di Timur Tengah itu presidennya yang maju, tetapi menteri luar negerinya banyak diamnya. Jadi inisiatif lebih banyak diambil oleh Presiden Prabowo, dan arah ke sana sudah terlihat ya. Apakah kebijakan pada periode kedua masa pemerintahan Jokowi terhadap Palestina akan diteruskan di Indonesia, mungkin dengan cara-cara yang sedikit bergeser ya. Kalau dulu banyak sekali kita menggunakan pendekatan international institutions. Jadi bagaimana ketika kita melihat Menteri Marsudi ya, sedang dalam forum G20, meninggalkan forum yang begitu penting bagi Indonesia, hanya terbang ke ICG ya, memberikan statement bahwa apa yang dilakukan Palestina itu adalah genocide. Dan itu harus diperangi, dan Indonesia pada standpoint yang kuat untuk mendukung bahwa menolak adanya pendudukan juga kolonialisme yang ada di Palestina. Untuk yang sekarang mungkin sedikit bergeser. Kemarin kita juga mendiskusikan apakah setelah sebelum 7 Oktober ketika Israel menyerang Gaza, kita sudah dalam seminar akhir tahun tentang potret Indonesian Outlook 2023 ya. Itu ketika itu saya presentasikan dari mewakili Pusat Riset Politik, saya mengatakan bahwa ketika sejengkal tanah itu sudah yang ada di Gaza yang sudah dimasuki oleh Israel, itu akan sangat tidak memungkinkan bahwa Israel akan menarik diri dari situ. Israel menunggu selama 75 tahun untuk bisa masuk ke dalam Gaza. Jadi mengapa hal demikian terjadi? Karena Gaza satu-satunya selama 70 tahun yang tidak bisa diambil sejengkal wilayahnya dibandingkan West Bank yang kalau kooptasi menjadi klaster 225 kelompok kantong kecil ya. Sehingga masyarakat West Bank jika ingin bersambang atau silaturahim ke tetangganya itu harus melewati batasan dan juga seleksi ketat dari aparat Israel untuk bisa masuk ke wilayah West Bank yang lain. Jadi semacam enclave communities ya. Gitu. Jadi arah foreign policy Indonesia ke depan diharapkan sebetulnya sedikit bergeser, kemungkinan sedikit bergeser dari international institution menjadi G2G ataupun lebih memasukkan peran Indonesia sebagai partner yang luar biasa. Termasuk kemarin yang ketika perundingan 20 poin Trump, Indonesia termasuk salah satu negara yang diundang, dan itu tidak semua negara yang diundang. Jadi di sini terlihat bahwa Indonesia telah mempunyai positioning yang cukup bagus, dan saya juga waktu itu menyarankan bahwa Indonesia bisa mengambil non-Arabic trusted countries dalam proses perdamaian ini yang kemungkinan bisa masuk dalam pasukan perdamaian yang akan dikerahkan di Gaza, dan itu inline saya kira kebijakan sudah on the right track, dan juga ketika audiensi kita dan Kementerian Luar Negeri kita menyarankan hal demikian untuk Indonesia mengambil salah satu fokus perdamaian.
Yeah, I would love to have another Q&A session, but I've been told by the pusher not to extend the time. But I think the panelists are still going to be here for the next 15 minutes. So I will prefer that the audience can directly ask questions to Antony or Dr. Wawan. But in conclusion, this is a very insightful but very heartbreaking topic, because again, even when there's a ceasefire in Palestine, the Israelis still hit airstrikes. Like for today, I recognize about this as well. But on the other side, I would like to conclude this with Palestinian voice. So I remember one of my favorite writers, Kanafani, like what I think to be the most important and most beautifully written books about the questions of Palestine and the way we should think about Israeli Zionism. It's called On Zionist Literature. It's not really relatively unknown compared with his novels and short writings, but in the last chapter of On Zionist Literature, Kassan writes that you have to know your enemy. And I think Antony's book on the Palestine Laboratory is a good attempt, as suggested by Kassan Kanafani, to actually know how your enemy is doing, in what way it debilitates and harms you, and not only that, harms other people as well. Because one of the most important things on Zionist literature that Kassan Kanafani suggests is the fact that if the Palestinian victim is denied by the Israeli state, by the states called Israel, it's important to understand that this also happens to other places. So it's also important to build solidarity, because there's the book was written after the failure of the pan-Arabism. So it's very important for Kassan Kanafani writes that the Palestinian revolution, the Palestinian resistance also must be based on international solidarity. And from this book, it's very clear that the pain that Palestinians has survived, undergone, and also sometimes they did not survive for 80 years and more, because frankly speaking, it also started during the Balfour Declaration. That this is a pain that is shared by many. And so that's why it's very important to start weaving the networks of solidarity, and we continuously will do so with the Palestine. Okay, so thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. Feel free to ask questions to Anthony after the session. So thank you so much again for hosting the event. Thank you so much.
Tadi saya lupa terus ngomong. Saya dipanggil dokter padahal sebelum dokter. Tadi mau ngomong lupa.
Thank you very much, Ibu Perdana, for being as a very productive session today. And ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our session. And on behalf of the Research Center for Politics, we would like to say thank you for your active participation today. We hope today's discussion enrich our understanding on Palestine. And for the participants who want to buy the books, we can directly buy in front of our room, and then Mr. Antony can also sign the book for you, hopefully. And before we end our session, I would like to invite all of the participants to have a photo session together with all of the speakers. Thank you very much. We wish you a blessed day, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next event. Thank you.